I would expect in, 2024, if 100% of our energy was put into like on-chain music specifically in 2023, expect that to be a little bit more balanced in like a 50-50 way, where 50% of our attention is probably going into reaching real music fans and 50% of our attention is going into reaching on-chain music fans. And I'll be the first to say that I don't know if this is going to work or not, but I really want to put us in a position where as the market starts to take a turn for the better and as music people start to get interested in crypto again, they can feel confident that Invest in Music is an outlet that's not only competent in on-chain music, but also just a good curator and a good tastemaker in the music industry in general.
Yeah, I do not wear my heart on my sleeve. I cannot let them see in too deep, cause I know they can use it against me. Only one I can trust is me. I got niggas I keep.
Episode 41 of Invest in Music. We are here today for 2024 outlooks and predictions. I'm joined by Sebas, my co-host here at Invest in Music. We talk about everything that we want to see coming up, really break down the current state of on-chain music, and break down our year in review report. As a reminder, you can collect this episode on investinmusic.xyz. It's the best way to support our guests. So without further ado, let's get into our first episode of the year, episode 41 with Seba from Invest in Music. What is going on, guys? We are back. First episode of 2024. We got Seba in the building. We're going to be talking about the 2024 outlook, talking about the current state of on-chain music, what's to come, and what to look forward to. So without further ado, Seba, how are we feeling today, man?
I'm feeling good, my dear Coop. It's a pleasure to be here on the pod, and yeah, feeling good and excited for what's to come in the next year.
I love it. So for those who don't know, Seba's been the one behind the scenes really taking charge and Invest in Music. He's a close friend of mine. We've been working together for many years and has been a key part of the Invest in Music team since day one. So before we dive into it, Seb, you want to give a quick background on yourself?
Yeah, sure. I've been in crypto for a few years now. So I was like tech obsessed. I've been tech obsessed for like 10 years or so. So like I used to be a tech journalist. After that, I started working in like communications, like positions in venture capital, accelerators, stuff like that here in Latin America. And eventually I met the Ethereum community, which is pretty strong in Argentina in like around 2018. And like basically blew my mind. And I thought like, I need to be part of this somehow. And eventually I started like, going to the meetups here, which had like pretty like prominent people from like projects like POAP or like MakerDAO who were from the city. So eventually I said like, I cannot wait anymore. And I started writing as a guest writer. That's how you and I met. And I remember you always told me, and you were like pretty, you're still younger than me. And you would say like, you need to like quit your day job, man, and just like go full writing. So I eventually did. I started working for DeFi Pools. I became the project lead there. That's where you and I launched the DeFi Pools farmer newsletter, which I think it was the first farming newsletter in the history of humanity. And after that, I left and I was head of content and community at Element Finance, which was, still is a DeFi protocol, fixed rates DeFi protocol. And then I got like kind of burnout and I decided I wanted to do what I love the most, which is music. And that's how I thought like, oh, I think Cooper, he has a newsletter. He's been working on this. So I started reading your newsletter and traveling and like meeting people from the music community because I wasn't part of that community. And we eventually started working together. So yeah, that's a quick history or biography.
Yeah. It's an amazing background too, because you and I linked through basically DeFi summer, which was the period of time when everyone was going crazy with yield farming and all of these like meme tokens and food coins and everything like that. And I think it's been very interesting building a media brand on the back of on-chain music, because obviously there's a lot of passion that we share for sort of the deep rooted crypto side of things, but then also figuring out how to actually talk about music and this new sector, which is a lot more niche than what DeFi was at the time, and trying to figure out just what this all looks like. So I think the core intention of this episode is really just to have a really open and honest conversation about what the current state of on-chain music looks like, what we've learned running Invest in Music, what some of our goals and ambitions are for this coming year. So, I guess tossing it over from a high level, what would you say the biggest thing that you've learned having been really entrenched in sort of the on-chain music ecosystem has been since joining this space after having a very strong DeFi background to start out?
So in terms of like us in Invest in Music or in terms of like industry level,
I'd say both.
Both. So like I'll start by Invest in Music. So I've realized like it is pretty hard to have a business model when you have a media company. So that I think applies to any media company, like not only in crypto, not only like on-chain media organizations like we are, but like any kind of like media company. So I think I've learned that that's a pretty big challenge, and that we still need to like run experiments to see like how that would how that could it, what potential options we have in the future for like a different kind of business model. And I would say that's one of the main learnings. And at the industry level, I think some of the main learnings are that it's really like so hard to have like real traction, organic traction in anything you build in crypto. And this is like a general discussion, not only in like music, but I would say like across crypto, in like every application, even DeFi. Like we know, like a lot of the usage and traction is usually subsidized by giving away tokens and all these things. So I've seen that in music, that also replicates in a way. So like a lot of times it seems like it doesn't depend on how good a project, a platform, or the art is. Still, traction and organic traction is still pretty fucking difficult. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. I would definitely echo your sentiment around finding a recurring business model for media companies is very difficult, specifically on-chain media companies, because I know one of the biggest intentions with Invest in Music is we post all of our articles on Mirror where you can collect them. We post all of our podcasts on Pods where you can collect them. We are a leading curator on Sound where you can earn referral fees when you collect our music. And so we're really trying to lean into this idea of being an on-chain media organization. But I think what's been challenging is that outside of those first couple posts, that have a lot of hype around them, finding a recurring model as to why someone would want to consistently collect multiple posts, multiple podcasts, multiple songs, it's very challenging, and especially as it being kind of the backbone of our organization, I think finding the recurring business model that allows us to make money to sort of run the business and figure out how to grow and scale it, you're almost capped in a lot of ways by the size of the market as a whole. And I think that's one of kind of the general philosophies that we've been trying to figure out internally is like the size of the on-chain music market is inherently very limited right now. The total number of collectors, the total number of dollars being spent, the amount of people that are interested in this type of content. And so I think a lot of our conversation internally is how do we expand to a wider audience in just the music market in general and try and not be so solely focused on just the on-chain music market, but also recognizing that our community and our listeners and the people that are following this podcast are the people who are very passionate about on-chain music. And so we never want to leave that or sort of step away from the people that have been supporting us since the beginning. But there's kind of this tension between how do you actually grow as a business to be able to create revenue for yourself and just scale the organization with the challenge of actually staying true to the intention of what you set out with at the beginning. And so I don't know if you have any additional thoughts to follow on with there, but it's been challenging to try and figure out how to balance those two equations.
Yeah, I think it is a big challenge because like usually like when you start a startup, like you have your initial set of customers, like your beachheaded market, right? So our initial users or evangelizers, right? The really, really early adopters, and you want to like support them. You want to like create value for them. You want to create like nice experiences for them. But at the same time, that set of users might not be the new set of users that you also need to keep it growing, right? So I think there's a tension there that I think we'll figure it out eventually, but it will be like a pretty interesting challenge. That basically tension in with your early adopters or visionary adopters, and the more like long tail that we want to onboard to invest in music and hopefully to like the industry as a whole.
Right. Because if you go back to our tagline, where fans become collectors, at least for me, when we were starting this organization, it was thinking about how do you take real music fans and convert them into collectors so that they can have a deeper relationship with their favorite artists, and we can really get them to experience a lot of the benefits of the space. And I think it's been interesting building this over the last 6 to 12 months because the value prop around on-chain music as a whole has changed multiple times. And you could argue that there's some similarities around being early to someone, being able to have a more direct relationship with the artist. But, speaking very openly here, I think that a lot of the promises around buy something and then sell it for a higher price later have gone out the window. I think a lot of the depth of the relationship that you get with an artist from being in their collector chat has gone out the window, where stating that another way, early on, I feel like when music NFTs were really popular, you could collect something, hop into a chat and have like a really meaningful conversation with people. Versus today, when you collect something, you go into a collector chat, there's nothing really that crazy engaging or like, you know, net new relative to what you can find elsewhere on the internet. And so I think a lot of people are really questioning like, what is the purpose of collecting and what does this actually do for me as a fan? And I think that's a lot of what we're trying to figure out with the Invest in Music is, what is the story that we're trying to tell when the kind of overarching narrative of why you should collect music in the first place also feels like it's a little bit shaky right now. And it's been an interesting place to try and figure out, you know, what our voice is and what our role is in kind of that conversation at large, you know?
Yeah, totally. And what do you think, like, do you think, you know, like just going back to our tagline that you were just mentioning, like, you know, where fans become collectors, do you think that there are a lot of fans, you know, collecting music? Or is it more like, I know there are collectors like you and I, we love music. We are collectors. We can also be DJs. We are music lovers as well. So we are fans. But do you think that applies to most collectors in like on-chain music, or is it mostly like people who wanted to like flip, you know, NFTs, and when that stopped happening, like they just left?
Well, I would say most artists that I talk to believe that collectors are not actually fans of their music. You know, I'd say the reputation that most collectors have right now is that they're speculators, which means that they want to buy something for cheap and then sell it for a profit later. And so I think when a lot of these artists are looking at their collectors, I don't think they're looking at them as super fans. I think they're looking at them as someone who financially supported them, but that they also have an obligation to appease or to somehow provide value back to because they spent more money on them than what they were ever used to in the past. And so to answer your question directly, I actually think that most of the people who are collecting music today are fans of the music. You know, to your point, I think that most of the people who are in it to buy music and sell it for a higher price later have left. But what's resulted in that is that there's such a small amount of people who are solely in it for being fans of the music that it's created a very small pocket of conversation to happen in the first place. And I think in general, what you're seeing across the board is that the interest around collecting as a whole has kind of gotten smaller because people are so unilaterally focused on the value prop of being a fan and a patron that the amount that they're having to spend to kind of consistently keep up with being a collector in the space is becoming challenging for people. You know, I'll speak for myself where it's like on any given month on sound, you know, I was probably spending maybe an ETH out of my personal portfolio, you know, just like collecting songs, going on every day, picking up 2 or 3 tracks, you know, 0.002 ETH here, 0.002 ETH there. And now it's getting to the point where I'm actually starting to recognize like, okay, I'm spending $10 on collecting this record. It has 6 out of 50 collected. It's not going to sell out. There's not going to be a secondary market for it. I like this person. I want to support them. But would I ever just give them $10 walking down the street? Probably not. You know, it's kind of like this weird situation where you're paying more than you would to consume music in general for the sake of like wanting to support someone. But when it comes to giving someone just like $10 for a song, I like this song, but I'm not going to lie and say that it's my favorite song in the world, you know? And so you kind of have this new dichotomy of forever editions where you're coming in and it's a quote unquote free mint, but it actually still costs like $1 or $2. And it starts to add up, you know, like I think when you go and you listen to music on Spotify and you're just liking songs and adding them to your playlist, like you don't really think about it. It's a very passive behavior because there's no financial cost associated with it. When you're collecting music on chain, you start to notice it, especially now during like, you know, a part of a cycle where there's other opportunities to make money on chain. You know, tokens are going up a lot, ETH's going up a lot, OP's going up a lot. And you're basically having to say to yourself, like, do I want to spend $10 supporting a friend or do I want to keep this money as a possible investment in the future? It starts to become a challenging question, you know? And I think one of the biggest challenges that on-chain music has this year is like, where does it fit into the wider conversation around someone who is an active participant in crypto, someone who's just an active music fan? And how do you justify spending $5, $10, $25, $30 a month on these songs when there isn't a potential for there to be a return on them? And you're not really getting a level of access to the artist that was originally promised out of the gate. You're more so just like socially signaling that you believe in this movement. And it's been a tough thing to juggle, to be very honest with you.
Yeah, I agree. And I've experienced the same thing. Like I was collecting like crazy, you know, for months. And, you know, at a certain point it was like, why am I collecting all these songs? Like how many will I collect? Like I have like, I don't know, like 1,500 like NFTs. Like, do I need like, I don't know, like 5,000 NFTs? Like maybe, I'm not sure. But like, I've actually like, you know, stopped seeing the value in collecting like except for the like significant and different collections, like I don't know, like song camp collections, stuff like that, where what you're collecting seems to be something different than just songs. But in general, I've experienced that. And I've also experienced fatigue around, like you were saying, like one of the key value propositions that we were thinking could apply for on-chain music were like transforming that relationship, right? Like that closeness to the artist, or between the artist and the fan, like being part of the community, creative process, or whatever form that might take. But like, how do you scale that? Like if you're like an audiophile, like you and like I like dozens, hundreds of artists. Like I cannot be in like, 100 chats participating.
Yeah.
Like I don't have like mental space for that. So like, how does that translate to like a world where we want like this like value propositions to scale? Like how many, how much attention can a single fan have for more than one artist when it's like really huge? What do you think?
And I think on the flip side, how much attention can an artist have for so many fans, right? It's like, I think that it's kind of like, it's a little bit on both sides, where the artist has an expectation to be active with their collectors. The collector has an expectation to be active with the artists that they collect. And instead, what we found is that it's kind of neither. You actually don't really see a lot of like very strong conversations happening with collectors and artists. Every here and there, there's pockets of good conversation that happen. But I would say for all intents and purposes, most artist chats are just like go in and say GM, say GM, say GM. Send a fun message here and there, but it's not like they're very like thought-provoking, stimulating. It's not like having deep conversations with that individual artist and whatnot. So it's definitely created a very challenging space. And to your question about scale, I think that for me, what I've really liked about the last couple of months in on-chain music is that we're moving away from like the promise being that you're going to be best friends with the artist to it being more of like a social signaling event, where these are more of like music social platforms. So like on Sound with their feed now, you're basically just sharing songs that you like with your friends. Your friends are collecting them. You talk about it. You're going on a live stream and talking about it. And it's kind of getting away from like the expectation that you're going to be meeting the artist and like buddy with them, to more just like it's a way for you to show the music that you like. And so I am very excited about that intention of it being more about the social experience of sharing music than it being about the direct relationship you have with the artist. But I think a byproduct of this has been why music NFTs are so cheap now, like relative to where they were maybe a year ago, where like a year ago, all these songs were 0.1 ETH, hundreds of dollars to collect limited edition of 25. And that was a very clear value prop from like a speculation side of things. But, now what you're seeing is that artists are playing around with these free mints because they want to just get it into the hands of as many people as possible. And I think that in many ways, using this as a medium to build an audience and build a fan base makes a lot of sense. But I have noticed there being a lot of pushback from artists who were very active early in on-chain music about these declining prices, because they feel that the music is now being quote unquote undervalued. And we're just going back to the world that we created with Spotify. But it's kind of like a catch-22, because if you keep the music super expensive, there's not going to be a lot of people to buy it. And if you keep the music super cheap, you may be undervaluing the music, but the intention of that is to try and get more people in the door. So it kind of creates this weird space in between where you kind of get the worst of both sides of it, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, and it is really fucking hard, right? Because like I was thinking a lot about that. Like if music is cheap, like supposedly you would get more distribution, right? I mean, you would get like more fans or more people to listen or collect. But in the end, like that was the distribution that was promised, like you were saying, like Spotify and others. Like, and in the end, it's always like it always end up looking like a power law distribution, right? So like a minimum percentage of artists like take all of the like streams or distribution, let's call it. So what I feel is that if that continues to happen on chain, like will we get the same distribution that that we could get via like Spotify or these incumbents? And at the same time, like, is it still interesting to collect music if it's cheap? Like to me, for example, like if it's $1, like I don't want to collect it. It's like, it's too cheap. Like I even think, in that way, like it's too cheap. Like why would this like accruing price? Like it's just like it's not like a vinyl, like an old edition of a vinyl that I also collect, but it looks more like just like an MP3 from Apple in a way.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of the challenge going into this year is, now putting on kind of my record label hat and the way that we're working with artists is trying to figure out like what is the right strategy for how to actually get people excited about collecting these records, And so last week we did this campaign with artists that were putting songs out on Base. Sound just launched on Base. we basically did a campaign where if you collect one of the songs, you get one OP token back in return. And so it's kind of like encouraging people to collect on this new network. All the songs are limited edition 25. So it kind of goes back to that initial intention that on-chain music kind of started out with. But I'll be very honest with you that it's very difficult to think about what this looks like in Q1 2024, where there's so much effort that's put into getting people to collect, $50, $100, $250 worth of music. I think before the juice was worth the squeeze, because you would do this marketing campaign, you would have this drop, you would make, multiple ETH, thousands of dollars, the equivalent of millions of streams. And that was a beautiful thing. But let's be honest, that's not a reality to happen across the board. And so now what you have is basically a lot of effort that's required for you to make a little bit of money. And I think it's kind of resulting in what we're seeing now is that there's not an increase in the amount of music being minted or the amount of collectors that are joining, because I think people in general are just kind of confused about the current value prop of it and kind of what the framework looks like and the wider sum of music and crypto as a whole.
Yeah. Maybe it's like one size doesn't fit all, right? Maybe like multiple like models can live at exist at the same time. Like, I don't know, but maybe some musicians can make high art out of music, and some others can make play the long tail with low price editions, depending on the reach that you have and what your goals are. But I think, yeah, we haven't, we're not even close to figuring out the model. One thing is that you were just mentioning the base campaign you did with Coop Records, and we saw a huge impact when Sound launched an Optimism, and basically before that also Polygon was pretty big with what was happening on Lens, on music there. I think it's kind of more quiet now, but it was also pretty significant throughout the year. And I think you mentioned Base, I think all these L2s are wonderful because they make everything more scalable, so cheaper and faster. It also, I think, had some impact in taking prices down.
Yep.
I don't know what you think about that, but yeah, that's what I think. But I also think that something like Base specifically could potentially be significant for the space because Coinbase is behind them, right? And I think one of their main goals for the year is creating the tools or having the tools in place so Coinbase can channel their users to Base. And I know they're interested in culture, so I'm wondering what do you think about the impact of L2s generally, and Base with Coinbase behind them specifically?
I think that this is the biggest bright spot for on-chain music, being a category leader in using layer 2 technology and showing why we need to have cheaper transactions, why we need to have, more instantaneous transactions. Music is the perfect use case for that. We talk about collecting a record for $1, $5, $10. Take aside whether or not you want to do that. The reason why layer 2 exists is to allow those type of conversations to happen in the first place. And so I think as far as the biggest bright spot from this past year, it was music being a leader in sort of the layer 2 conversation in general. And then even more specifically than that, your question about Base, I feel like that's kind of the biggest thing that I'm excited about this year is figuring out how to reach real music fans. I look to networks like Base as kind of the beacon to be able to get there, because I think they have an understanding of what it looks like to build a product for real people. You mentioned the support from Coinbase there. And while there's obviously still a ways to go before Coinbase user is able to easily collect something on Sound, I think that the shared intention that we need to make all these tools easier, we need to allow people to onboard in a more seamless fashion. We need to make it so that people don't have to spend a ton of money to get started in the first place. The intention is very correct. And I feel like for the first time in crypto's history, we're finally waking up to how complicated all this technology is, how hard it is to use, and how steep of a learning curve there is to get started. So at least for someone like me, when I saw the Sound and Base partnership, I looked at things like On-Chain Summer. I looked at all the different campaigns that have been going on and the conversations on platforms like Farcaster. And to me, I think that Base is basically a bet on mainstream culture and mainstream adoption. And we had an episode with Jesse Pollack that I'd highly recommend people go and listen to. But I just feel like in a lot of ways, the leaders of these organizations really set the tone for what kind of projects get built on top of them. And I think the reason why I get so excited about something like Base is that I feel like someone like Jesse has a really clear understanding of what it means to build for real people. And I think whereas a lot of L1s and L2s in crypto have been so focused on crypto products, where they're just building DeFi applications and public goods infrastructure and governance tools, which are all great. I think that Base is kind of taking a different approach of being like, okay, we need to build this ecosystem for creatives and for artists and for fans and for real people. And so I'm optimistic that over the course of this year, we're going to see an influx of different apps that are being built on top of layer twos and more specifically on top of Base. Things like Friend Tech, for example, that just show that we can build products that are really meant to reach real people. And I'm hopeful that that intersection will lead to this silver lining, which becomes an inflection point for crypto and music at some point in the future.
I love that. What do you think about, like, since we're mentioning like L2s, it's not an L2 really, but like we've seen like, you know, Solana mooning and there's a lot of activity there. Like, what do you think about music on Solana? You know, we don't cover it a lot. Like, I'm only familiar with like Nina protocol, which I like, but like, do you have any thoughts on like, you know, can music have its moment on, you know, a chain like Solana? What do you think?
Totally. I think that there's net new applications that are possible to be built on top of Solana that just aren't possible on top of Ethereum. You know, and it's hard to imagine what that looks like currently, but I think if you zoom out far enough, there's a capacity for the winning music app to be built on any chain right now, is the reality of it, you know? And I guess the way I view it is I have my my Solana smartphone right here, you know, rated the worst phone of the year by what's a really big YouTuber, which was the best meme of all time. And the value prop is that you buy this phone and you get more tokens than the phone's actually worth. Now, am I actually buying the phone to use it for the technology of the phone? No, I'm buying it for the meme of the fact that I have the phone and the fact that I'm getting tokens with it. And so to your question about what I think about Solana in general is it's just a new mind share. You know, I think the way that I view crypto as a whole is like, I try not to get too rooted into one specific ecosystem or one way of doing things because the meta always changes. You know, what people find exciting always changes. And I think the one silver lining on this whole Solana meme coin situation is that it really speaks to people really want to spend money on things that are really simple and really dumb and really easy to understand. And if you go and look at a lot of the activity that's happening on Solana right now, you see these meme coins pumping to billions of dollars of volume. You see all of these, you know, really, really simple ideas kind of capturing a ton of value. And that's not to discredit. Solana has a ton of amazing builders. They have incredibly smart people that are building the technology, but when you look at where a lot of the volume is going, it's going into memes like a dog wearing a hat. It's going into a meme like a gently used Honda Civic. You know, these things that are just like very easy to digest. And I think the reason why I'm bullish on that mindset is that my general philosophy for this year is like smooth brain, make these things as simple and easy to use as possible, try and remove all of the crypto jargon and values and like all of the things that just complicate it and just go down to the basics of like, can you explain this to someone who has never touch crypto in their life? And so to really answer that question about Solana and music, yeah, I think there's a real shot that we start to see some more breakout music applications on Solana. And I would say one of my wider hopes for this year in general is that we really start to expand the pie of the different ways to monetize music on chain, where artists who are interested, excited, and passionate about putting their music on chain feel like they can actually have multiple avenues to make money so that they don't feel so boxed into only one specific way of doing things, but actually have a wide set of tools and a wide set of options to be able to explore for the ways that they are, you know, building their brand and actually creating new ways to monetize their music.
Yeah. Do you think those, like, you know, new ways to monetize will just be, you know, we'll continue to try to replicate what we already know? So like merge, touring, concerts, all these things, or that we can come up like with new things, right? Like, I don't know, like, there's, you know, I love TK and what he's building with Garden X, I think it's like a net new thing. I don't know what it is yet. I think like he's building it, but I perceive that as like a net new thing that didn't exist before and can only exist on chain. Even though if you abstract on chain for the, you know, collectors, which I totally agree that we absolutely need to do. But do you think it will be more about like, yeah, replicating existing, like, you know, like revenue models from the, you know, traditional music world, or like creating new things, mix of both?
You know, it's a really interesting question to ask, because one thing I've been challenging myself on recently is that we really force people to learn new behaviors when it comes to Web3. You know, when it comes to collecting music on chain, when it comes to buying tokens, when it comes to doing things like staking and getting airdrops and burning and governance and whatnot, it's a whole new world. You know, when you come and you play around with any crypto product, you're forced to learn an entire new set of tools. You're forced to learn an entire new set of technology. And so in a lot of ways, I do think that we can get a lot of value out of expanding on existing behaviors and trying not to only introduce new behaviors. But I'll be very transparent in saying that just like recreating digital merch doesn't get me super fired up. I would argue that like recreating virtual experiences around concerts is very exciting. But to answer your question directly there, I don't know what this looks like, and I think that's kind of like a lot of the sentiment that I'm carrying into this year is sort of a very open mindset to what the different ways are to monetize music on chain, because I don't think there is a very clear, like, quote unquote winner right now on this being the way that this all unfolds in its broad mindset. And I think for anyone listening to this, the question that I would challenge them with is like, get creative, get outside of the box, like think about new ways to try and monetize music in any way, shape, or form, because we don't have the answers. And especially when it comes to us here at Invest in Music, I think one of our biggest challenges for this year is A, trying to reach a new set of people, and then B, just really being open-minded to new ways to doing things, because I think that we need to challenge ourselves to think outside of the box for this space to have a meaningful chance of having growth and progress across the board.
Totally agree. Yeah.
I think it's a good position for us to transition to this report that we wrote this year. So a couple weeks ago, we published this year in review report. And I think that you just touched on a lot of the different topics there, but I would highly encourage anyone that's listening to this to go and check it out. Do you want to talk a little bit about sort of the intention of that report we put together, Seb, and then maybe some of your like takeaways from the report in general?
Yeah, totally. So like the intention behind that report was to like, have a snapshot on what's happening, in on-chain music. Like every report, like, it only like shows like certain like parts of what's happening. So like by that, I want to say that we never thought we could do something that would, show all, all the industry, but basically we try to be as inclusive as possible with like different artists, genres, and also with different types of companies, like no matter their size that they had, to have like a snapshot on what's happening. So I think it was like, from that angle, it was like successful, and it was honest as well, because like we didn't like say like, we actually spoke about all the challenges that we faced, and we tried to be as inclusive as we could. I think some of the highlights that were a little crazy to me were specifically with the top artists by volume, right? Because like in some chats they were asking me like about Sheely, for example, like who is Sheely? No one had heard about him, and he's like a top 5 worldwide by volume artist. And I was like, we included Sheely because like he had like this like incredible volume, and same with like Violeta Zironi, which she has like she's a musician, of course, as well, like Sheely, but her project is more like an NFT like based, like PFP based, an intersection of PFP with music. So like it was a little same thing with Sammy Arriaga. Like it was a little crazy to me to like see firsthand that the top selling artists by volume were actually not doing just music. Same with Rocky, which is like basically they are creating this like whole universe with their videos and whatnot. So like I think that part about top artists by volume was a little like mind blowing to me. Like is it only about the music? So I think that was something that I put a lot of thought into, like why it looks in this way.
Yeah, I would echo that. It's very interesting to recognize that the top artists from last year in terms of sales volume were the ones who were really getting outside the box with the ways that they were putting their music on chain, with the way that they were telling their stories. They're extremely active in their communities and in their chats. And I think it's very representative of where the current space is, which is to say that the more energy that someone puts in to their on-chain footprint, the more success they're going to have. And that feels like a very obvious thing to say, but it's worth reflecting on, because I think in a lot of ways, it's actually one of the biggest critiques and challenges of the space is that the largest artists in on-chain music are not the largest artists putting their music on chain. There are many artists who have more followers online. There are many artists who have more monthly listeners, who play bigger shows, that have been putting their music on chain, but we don't see a one-to-one correlation between the size of an artist on Spotify, Instagram, etc., and the size of the volume of their collections on chain. Instead, what you see is that the artists who are more dedicated to their collectors, that are putting more time and effort into it, are seeing drastically higher results. And I feel like it's a very interesting thing to reflect on, because I feel like in a lot of ways, when people come into the space and they talk about what artists to follow and what artists to pay attention to, you're challenged to relearn an entirely new set of artists. You're like, okay, here's these artists who are doing crazy numbers on chain. And then with all due respect, if you go and look at their following on Spotify or on Instagram or something like that, the numbers don't stack up. And so I think what I'm kind of hoping for this year is for there to be a little bit more of a alignment between like artist development in general and artists gaining a following in the traditional world, starting to play bigger shows, starting to have larger streaming numbers, and their volume correlating to that on chain, which is to say that if a record is doing really well, it's going viral on TikTok, it's going viral on Instagram, it's having millions of plays on Spotify, how do we actually convert a very, very small percentage of those people to be collectors? Because, you know, for all intents and purposes, I would say what I see right now is that the collectors of records on chain are not the same fans of the music on Spotify. And the fans of the music on Spotify don't even know that you can collect the records on chain. And if they do know that you can collect the records on chain, they don't really have any interest in doing it because the value prop is not clear. And so I think the opportunity there is to figure out, how do you actually get fans of these artists and of this music to spend some amount of money on the music on chain in some way, shape, or form, such that a wider percentage of the total volume being spent on this artist is actually coming from their real fans and not just from crypto people alone, if that makes sense.
Makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. One other thing that I thought like it was kind of like healthy and it's like, you know, it's super positive is that even though like a bunch of like projects died or like, you know, wind down or closed, we still have like a lot of projects, right? In an industry that's just getting started, that's still small, that it had a moment when it like couple of years ago, but I would argue, like, let me know if I'm mistaken because I'm newer here, but I would argue that it hasn't had like a massive moment, right? Like it happened to like, you know, NFTs after DeFi summer or during the previous bull market. So even in this scenario, we still have like a whole bunch of like projects across different categories and a lot of like, you know, founders who are, you know, putting a lot of effort, like, and I want to say this, that I think like these are like people, right? So like it's people who are trying to, you know, build these things. Sometimes it doesn't work, but I think it's a beautiful thing to see, you know.
Yeah, I would say for those who haven't checked out this part of the report, at the very bottom of it, we have a fundraising section, investment rounds, excuse me, which is just a bunch of different teams that raised capital over the course of the last year. And I think to Seba's point, we are still very early in this. There obviously have been some teams that have had to wind down. You know, it's been very impressive to see the teams that have been able to raise capital and kind of bootstrap their business in the wake of a bear market. But man, I'll be very honest with you that I think the general sentiment across the board right now is that a lot of founders in on-chain music are really struggling to understand where to take their business, where to take their company, how to make money, how to grow their brand, how to grow their number of collectors, how to grow their number of artists. And so we're in a really, you know, transitional phase here. We're in a really like make or break period where I feel more confident than ever that within the next 2 years, we're going to see a strong cycle for crypto as a whole. You know, I think like we're seeing ETH go up across the board. We're seeing Solana go up across the board. Tokens like OP and Arbitrum are doing really well. So I feel extremely confident 2025, we're going to have like a crypto bull market, quote unquote. But I think my biggest worry right now is, where does music play into this? Like, how do we position this whole industry and sector in a way that it is capturing the value of the upcoming crypto bull market and then optimistically driving that narrative in the first place? Where a reason why a bull market happens within crypto is because there's a series of applications that are music based that are actually bringing on millions of new users to the space, causing them to get their first liquidity, causing them to earn their first ETH, et cetera. And I think that's my biggest concern right now, is that if we don't figure this out, crypto is going to go in a bull market, music's just going to be left in the dust, and we're not going to have any responsibility for the success of the space as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah. And even worse, like if we don't, like, I also think like bull market will happen, like will start happening like second half of this year and into 2025. And like, if we don't, like, the best scenario would be what you were just saying, like music takes like a prominent, like, you know, role within that bull market, like, you know, onboarding artists and with like new use cases that actually like generate a lot of, you know, activity volume and like real usage, hopefully from like people who are not only degens. But let's say that doesn't happen. We still need to take the, we still, I mean, we cannot miss the headwinds of the bull market. because like if we meet like the bull market, like let's say like I think it will happen. If it happens and we don't take that opportunity to at least like, let's say we don't have the use cases as an industry, but we don't take that opportunity to like, you know, channel capital to our industry, channel users to our industry, and we just see it go by, I think that can be like, will be like, could be potentially like really, really bad, like not only in terms of like, you know, the development of the industry at a capital formation level and all these things, but also in terms of like, you know, sentiment of the people who are building and the artists who are creating, like if they just see it go by and nothing happens in music. So like, I think, yeah.
And I mean, I think in a lot of ways, that's why we've been so active with Optimism and trying to do so many campaigns with them. So for those who aren't familiar, we have this on-chain curator campaign where we've been giving our community OP tokens every month for sharing different links to music, driving referrals, creating content. You know, we were really lucky to have won the Retro PGF reward from this last cycle, which means that we're going to get back some amount of Optimism tokens for talking about the collective. And then on a third note, you have this We Heart the Art competition that's closing next week for any musician to be able to submit a song and possibly earn up to the top prize. I was looking today, it's 50,000 OP, which at current prices is literally like 170 grand. And so I think for us, you know, take aside the dollar value there. The reason why I think it's important for people listening for this to pay attention to a thing like Optimism is that music exists within its own little pocket and its own niche. You know, people like me and you are very passionate about it. There's dozens of collectors and artists who are passionate about it. But within the wider conversation about crypto, music occupies a very small blip of it. And I think the way in which we start to influence that conversation is being active in wider conversations around network governance. So things like Optimism's grant programs, Retro PGF, We Heart the Art. You know, I think these are the way that we can start to show the power and potential and the impact of music is by being vocal and active in that conversation and showing that, hey, music is this Trojan horse into how we get this technology out into the rest of the world. And if you're someone that's active in the space today, I really think some of the best things that you can be doing is finding ways to be active in things like these Optimism grants programs, because it really allows you to be a part of the wider conversation and show that this is a space worth paying attention to.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think to what you're saying, that when people like, you know, other crypto people like in the Optimism Collective, for example, or, you know, in other like parts of the industry, like when they find out about music, through someone like they know and trust, like, I don't know, like a friend, for example, they get excited about it. Like, and I'll say like this, like might be like shallow examples, but like, for example, I remember when we threw that event in Colombia for DEF CON, right? With which went great. And I remember how a bunch of like DeFi founders who were friends came to the event and they were saying like, oh, this is a fucking amazing event. Like, you know, I prefer being here than in the DeFi events. So I think even those like shallow aspects, like we need to like take, you know, make them work in our favor in a way, because like people, I think, just love music and love art. So so yeah, I think that I'm fully on board with your idea about like, you know, just being more relevant across these spaces.
Yeah, and I think even taking it a step further, it leads into our next focus for this year, which is going beyond on-chain music. You know, and I think this is something that we need to figure out in real time. But I think the wider intention here is how do we get this conversation to go bigger than just the people who are currently in on-chain music, because it's such a small demographic of people. We mentioned earlier that we want to be reaching music fans in general. I want to be reaching emerging artists in general. And so what that looks like for Invest in Music is a big focus on short form content this year, you know, figuring out how we can start to tell these stories beyond just Twitter to actually reaching people on Instagram and TikTok and places that they already are. And honestly, probably having a lot more conversations that aren't just about the intersection of crypto and music. You know, I would say like for all intents and purposes, if you look at our last 40 episodes, if you look at the recaps that we write every week, if we look at the music that we're spotlighting, we are really, really laser focused on highlighting on-chain music, you know, the leading artists in that space, the top founders, collectors, everything in that world. And you're definitely going to see a ton of that from us this year. But one thing that I'll call out is that we really want to start to push ourselves to be digestible to real music fans, where people who know nothing about on-chain music, people who don't care about crypto, people who don't care about collecting can consume our content and be interested in actually learning about some of the other things that are going on. But I think this is actually going to be a big shift in tone and of focus for this year, which is to say that I would expect in, 2024, if 100% of our energy was put into like on-chain music specifically in 2023, expect that to be a little bit more balanced in like a 50-50 way, where 50% of our attention is probably going into reaching real music fans and 50% of our attention is going into reaching on-chain music fans. And I'll be the first to say that I don't know if this is going to work or not, but I think to your point about missing it, quote unquote, I really want to put us in a position where as the market starts to take a turn for the better and as music people start to get interested in crypto again, they can feel confident that Invest in Music is an outlet that's not only, competent in on-chain music, but also just a good curator and a good tastemaker in the music industry in general. Because let's not ignore the fact that there are hundreds of amazing emerging artists that are coming out every month. There's so many amazing opportunities within music. There's a bunch of different tech that's coming out. There's things like AI music. And, I think our challenge this year is to really figure out like what our voices and who our audiences that we're speaking to. But I would say one of my larger intentions for on-chain music this year is going beyond our current focus of the people who are currently here to reaching the rest of the world where they currently are and really allowing our content to meet them halfway.
Totally. Yeah. And hopefully, like, if we succeed at doing that, we can also, like, have an impact in the industry as a whole, right? Because, like, I think Invest in Music is like one of the most prominent voices in the industry. So, like, I don't want to say if we are successful, the industry is successful, because that's not fair. But what I do want to say is that if we success at onboarding more people, that hopefully can also replicate in the industry as a whole.
And I think it can challenge our peers and our community to think more deeply about the way that they build their community and the way that they build their brands as well. I think one thing that I've really been trying to challenge teams that I talk to in my day-to-day is like, how is this going to resonate with someone who's never touched crypto before? I think you see a lot of teams that are so heavily leaning into the fact that they are a crypto product that they're just boxing out 99% of the world from even being able to use their product in the first place. There may be people who would be excited about using a crypto app, but they don't care about crypto, and they hit the site and they see collect on chain, they see mint, they see NFT, they see all the mention of these platforms, and it's super overwhelming to them. So I'm kind of hoping that throughout the course of this year, we can find the way to really speak to the average person about what we're doing here in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming. And I think what that looks like is probably putting a lot more emphasis on short form content, trying to have more conversations with just artists who aren't super deep into crypto and just kind of hear their stories. And, hopefully by the end of this year, have found a content format that allows us to be reaching an audience that goes beyond the current on-chain music market that exists today.
Yeah. I'm fully on board on the, fully on board on like going through that, like, down that rabbit hole and try to make it happen. I think like you were saying at the beginning, like we kind of like maxed out in terms of like readers, users, collectors, like community that we can reach. So I think it's about time to basically expand and transform ourselves.
Yeah. And speaking of expanding and transforming, I know that we had seen a bunch of takes on 2024 predictions this last week from different people in the community. Without going into any specific ones, what was kind of your general reaction to the takes that you saw about predictions this year? Maybe any just like general sentiments or philosophies that you want to share about what you expect to happen this year?
So like general like sentiment and philosophies I've seen, or at least it's like my perception is that there's like kind of I would say this sentiment that music is not being valued as it should be, and that artists are not finding ways to make this work for them. So like so I feel that they are trying to think about. I mean, I've seen like proposals around like making partnerships with existing brands, or thinking about like existing platforms, or just using like crypto as a tool, or trying to think of like or expecting something new to come, which is like a new model that everyone can replicate. So my general feelings are that no one really knows, right, what can happen, and I feel there's a little of this feeling of feeling a little like frustrated about like music, specifically for artists. That I've seen more like predictions from artists than other industry, like other people. So I resonate with that. I feel it. I think it's a huge challenge, And but I also think, like, to what we were just discussing, that it's about, like, I think one is like continue experimenting, even though it's exhausting for artists to go from one model to the other and stuff. I think maybe artists shouldn't like pay so much attention at like what other people and platforms say about like this is the model, and just like try the models themselves and sell their models. Like, this is a model I think will work, and let's try to make this work, instead of like following like different trends. So maybe it's going through that path and continue experimenting and bringing more people. I think I don't want to make predictions, because like I think I'm bad at making predictions, but I think I'm better at like thinking like about like things that we can do that could enable possible better futures.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would also +1 the general sense of frustration within the space. I mean, I'll just speak for me personally. I've definitely felt a bit stuck this last month or two, and knowing what the way to navigate looks like moving forward, knowing the right way to price drops, or how to collect music, or how to make any money when it comes to on-chain music. So that frustration definitely exists with me internally, and I'm sure exists with other people as well. But I would say that my general prediction for this year is that the artists who can figure out how to bring the most real music fans on chain this year will be the most successful. I think if the last couple years were about the artists who were able to speak to the most crypto people being the most successful, I think the real opportunity now is whoever can get people to make new wallets, whoever can get people to be spending $1 to $5 on their work. I think there's going to be different camps of people in on-chain music. I think that there exists a pocket of people who are going to be considered like fine artists, like they're minting their pieces for very high price points because their work is very valuable, and that's a beautiful thing. But I think across the board, what we should expect is that, in my personal opinion, the only way that this works is if collecting becomes truly free. Some level of collecting. I'm not saying this has to be your most rare one-of-one limited edition, but I don't think that it's possible for this space to succeed if everyone needs to have $1 plus of crypto in a MetaMask wallet in order to get started in the first place. I think what this looks like is that most real fans will get started by signing up with an email, having their gas costs fronted for them, and collecting something on Sound completely for free, where they don't even think about the price of it, and they're purely doing it as a social signal. But, I would say from a high level, we do need to create new models to bring people on chain, because I think if one thing is clear to me, collecting is one way to get people to support music on chain, but it's not the only way. I think you've seen the launch of platforms like Sona recently, and you've seen the launch of these other tools that are coming down the pipeline, and people are just really challenging the question of what does it look like to get people to use crypto apps in general. And so I'd say, broadly speaking, I'm keeping a really open mind to it. And for anyone that's listening to this, if you have out-of-the-box ideas on new ways to monetize music, if you're thinking about new ways to unlock liquidity or potential excitement within the ways that you're putting your music on chain, drop me a note. I'm really open to anything at this point in time. And I think that especially headed into the next market, the best thing we can do is be really flexible and nimble and really aware of the different things that are happening in the market at large, and try and find a way to get people excited about this space, so that when that next cycle does happen, the projects that we're talking about now can be the ones that people are really pointing back to as being the leading voices in what shaped this next cycle of the market in general.
Yeah, I think like there's only like, to me at least, there's a caveat with the like I totally get your point about like why music should be like free or super cheap, which is basically like, correct me if I'm wrong, but scale basically, right? And like getting scale. But what I think is that, whereas I agree, partly agree, at the same time I think that if we do that, we are just competing with incumbents who are like just so big, right? Because like what's it like if songs are free on Sound or Sona, or well, Sona, they have like a different model, one-on-ones, but let's say like Sound, for example, if like music is free there, or like virtually free, aren't they competing with like Spotify or SoundCloud? And like, can they compete? And why people would collect something that's free? What's the difference between just liking it if you can collect it? Whereas like you and I know it's an NFT, you have it, you own it, blah, blah, blah. But like, for a different mental model, what would the difference be? And would that even like, end up killing platforms because they are competing with these like giant incumbents? Like, what do you think?
I think one thing I've really come to understand recently is how much opportunity there is to offer transparency around all forms of music data, whether that be the listeners, whether that be the followers, whether that be the amount of money that a song is making, whether that be around the amount of money that someone is spending on music. Music is a very opaque industry right now. And I think a big reason why so many music social apps have failed in the past is because it's very difficult to draw tangible insights about why music is valued in the way that it is. You know, you can look at a song on Spotify and guess that if it has 1 million plays, that someone probably made around $3,700, but there's no public reporting of that. You know, there's no stats in the same way we have stat lines for sports or basketball or football or anything like that. And so I think that the immediate question of why would someone collect something for free? I'll be honest with you, I don't have a great answer for that, but I think the intention of why that's important is because if you look at the growth and the evolution of platforms like Spotify, I'm optimistic that in the future, music data becomes a lot more publicly accessible. And by making that data more accessible, we can start to create stronger network effects and stronger ecosystems where public music data allows us to create deeper, more rich markets around these artists and around their music in general, which will create more liquidity opportunities for the artist as a whole. So to give an example of that, right now, the only people who are investing in artists generally are record labels because they have access to proprietary data, they have access to streaming numbers, to royalty statements, etc. If you're a fan and you want to go and get the royalty statement from your favorite artist on Spotify, you're screwed. There's no way that you can do that. If you're a fan of an artist on Sound and you want to get their data, you go to Etherscan and you look at how much they've made, you know, how much they've minted across the board. You look at the splits, you see everything that's happening in real time. And I think while it doesn't address the conversation around why something should be free, getting more people to opt in to a system where all those things are possible under the hood is going to create a lot more opportunity in the future. And so I think it's more about the belief in where this can actually go once it works, much more than how it's actually going to feel today, right? Where if you're collecting a song for free, I agree with you. What's the point of collecting it if it's free versus you can like it on chain? I don't have an answer to that. You know, I could argue that there's a little bit more of a social experience around it from the sound feed. I would argue that maybe there's a completely free version and then maybe there's a limited edition version. Maybe it's about getting, you know, more of a public persona associated with the artist itself. But I think for me, I think less about like, what's the point of collecting today? Because the reality is, we talked about it all in this episode, there already basically is no point in collecting these things today. You know what I mean? So it's like, what's the difference if we move this from $1 to free when for all intents and purposes, the $1 thing isn't really getting the job done as is. So we might as well try the free thing, see if that works. If that doesn't work, try something else. Versus what I really want to challenge people listening to this to understand is we need to push the space forward and we need to change things. There's going to be things that don't work. There's going to be things that work. There's going to be some things that force us to take a step backwards. But I think especially for us here at Invest in Music, I don't want to wait idly around for something to happen that works. I want to challenge us to encourage people to try the new things, give them a platform where they can feel confident to share their new ideas with people and learn from those insights to inspire new ideas. And so for all intents and purposes, if we generally oversummarize this episode, I'm extremely proud about what we accomplished in on-chain music in this last year. I'm extremely proud of the work that we've done to invest in music. And I think that this year-end report shows that there was quite a lot of progress that happened this year. That being said, we have a really, really long way to go. I think we really need to look hard in the mirror and recognize that if we don't make some big changes this year, that the space is not going to work. And so I think being able to be humble and realistic about the space of where things are currently at, it allows us to move forward in a very progressive manner. And so I don't know if I answered your question, but I would say for all intents and purposes, if making songs free, truly free to correct, allows us to experiment with the next iteration of the cycle, I'm all for it because it at least allows us to understand and learn. Even if this thing's free, why can't we get people to collect it now? And then that starts to force us to understand, why do people actually want to do this in the first place, which gets us towards the eventual North Star of why a fan would want to be a collector, which is the whole reason that we're doing this thing in the first place.
You answered my question, yeah.
Nice. Well, I guess we're coming right up on an hour here, so it feels like a good place to kind of wrap things up. Seb, I'm going to turn this back over to you. What are some of your hopes and some of your ambitions for Invest in Music this year? Without getting too specific about anything quantitative, you know, we're coming back, we're doing this episode a year from now. Where do you hope that we are as an organization, and what are some things that you're looking forward to?
So like, other than like what we discussed about, like, you know, bringing more people and all these things, I think I would like us to be more of an on-chain media organization in terms of like, I would like us to like experiment more with like on-chain, like on-chain stuff. Basically, I would like us to be the a new kind of media that's not only music. I mean, we are music based, but that can actually like influence the wider crypto industry in terms of like how can an on-chain media organization look like. So I'm basically quite interested about like starting to experiment more around like on-chain specific it's not fundamentals, but like the base layer, like to be more on chain, experiment with new things, and try to figure out new models that don't exist today for the wider like media industry, on chain media industry.
I would echo that. I would say one of my wider intentions is for us to be just more hands-on. I think that we did a really good job of publishing all our posts on Mirror, of minting all of our podcasts, of being a leading curator on sound. And I want to really expand that intention to going to more platforms that allow us to curate music on chain, more ways for us to monetize our music on chain, more ways to just be active in the short form world. And just generally speaking, I want to look back on a year from now and feel like we brought in a net new wave of people to the space, and that our community feels like they have a really good compass on what it means to be active in on-chain music and to feel passionate about wanting to support these projects in a space as a whole. So with that being said, Seb, thank you for coming on. I feel like this was a very vulnerable and honest episode, which I absolutely love. And I'm really excited for this year. But before we sign off, where can people stay up with you, man? You're an incredible human. You're an amazing dancer and an amazing fan of music. I know you said to me one of your personal goals for this year is to expand your public brand and your personal persona. Where should people follow you on social media?
Yeah, so people can follow me on Twitter or X. It's S Aldazoro. It's a little hard to pronounce in English, so it's basically S, my name, and Aldazoro is my last name. And for people who like videos, I'm really in the underground scene here in Buenos Aires, so I do a lot of videos on my Instagram, which is Sebastian_Aldazoro. So you can also follow me there. And I'm starting to write on Mirror as well. So like Mirror, which is like sebas.eth. So Sebas is short for Sebastian. And Mirror, Instagram, and Twitter.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. The first episode of many to come in 2024. Sebastian, I appreciate you dealing, my friend. And we'll talk to you guys again next week. See you, everyone.